Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 8th of June 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm back now in São Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan, and I am back as well, Mark, having been in Casablanca, London, and Glasgow over the course of the past week and a half.
Well, I did see you in Glasgow, and my wife and daughter were out there, and we're grateful to you and the team for letting us ride on the bus at the end of the conference. That was a great trip around Glasgow.
It was indeed a great trip, and I would highly recommend anybody who is interested in getting a look at either Glasgow or Edinburgh from a vantage point that's very unique. Take a look at the Red Bus Bistro. They do a traditional afternoon tea that encompasses a visit for about 90 minutes around both of those beautiful cities, depending which one you're in. I think we can agree, Mark, that the food was delicious. And some of us, I know, sampled some of the gin that they had on offer as well. I won't say who, but shall we say that nobody left the Red Bus Bistro unsatisfied.
Yeah, well, we just stuck to the champagne. Nobody told me about the gin anyway.
Well, yeah, that's why you got to look into these things. You find out a few secrets depending on which website you check out. But it was really, really good to see you. It was great to see the entire CxO ecosystem. The last time we all got together was in Las Vegas about 9 or 10 months ago, and certainly Glasgow did not disappoint. And I believe that's the topic of the interview that you are going to be referring to today with Stephen Loynd from TrendzOwl.
Yeah, and this came about because, I was actually intending to do a few Vox Pops at CxO, but you know how it is when you're at a conference, it's very noisy, there's people all over the place, so in the end it turned out to be very difficult. So what I did was call up Steve, because we were both on a panel together at the conference that was focused on the future of CX. We obviously talked about all of the kind of issues that you can think of, such as AI and gig CX, BPO consolidation, so kind of what's happening in the industry right now and what might happen in the near future. And so I thought that would be a great way just to sort of give a recap of some of the topics we were discussing at CxO.
Exactly. And what I would say is your panel specifically was really interesting. There were lots of different elements to it. And I think the way Leanne Rollins, our MC, described managing that panel was like keeping order at a sleepover with a bunch of 15-year-olds. And certainly you and the team did not disappoint.
Well, absolutely. And thankfully it wasn't a bunch of kids in Portsmouth, especially.
Well, that would be a whole different podcast for a whole different day. Now, that said, Mark, there were some key takeaways at CxO, and I think the big elephant in the room was probably the point about generative AI. Now, we had two speakers specifically who covered that off, Simon Chris, who joined us from Melbourne, Australia, as well as Chris Gillen, who joined us from Atlanta, Georgia. And I think that there was a lot of fascination based on what we're seeing in the media right now. Equally speaking, when we consider the fact that talent has been such a big topic over the last while, there were a few different speakers and panels that took that on. And when you combine it along with the topics that you discussed on the emerging CX delivery, emerging CX delivery elements going into 2023 and beyond, there was a lot of food for thought coming out of CxO, and I think a lot of strategic initiatives will be based from the outsourcing community around some of the key topics and themes that were discussed over the course of that day and a half in Glasgow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to get, the voice from inside the industry and some of the experts. Simon was clearly a leading sort of thinker in this space, and he even did some ChatGPT demonstrations live at the event, which that's always risky when you're relying on the AV and everything to keep working. But it was great to get the sort of feedback on where it's really going compared to what you read in the mainstream media, because if you look at the media, it's all pictures of Terminator, jobs are about to vanish, everything is doom and gloom, and we're all finished, and yet when you actually talk to everybody who's actually kind of designing systems that are using this technology, they're saying no, this is a chance to increase efficiency, to increase quality, increase productivity. These are tools that are actually making the agents much, much more effective at their job. And the honest truth is that a lot of the very, very simple kind of stuff, very simple customer interactions that we would expect bots to be handling have already been automated out of the system anyway. So it's really, at the moment, it seems that the big focus is improving the life of the agent in the contact center rather than immediately having this kind of like robot interface for the customer.
Bang on. And just referring back to Simon's presentation where he did apply ChatGPT, you're right, it did take a lot of courage, and it took a heck of a lot of courage to try and get me to stand up and sing Verses from Highway to Hell by AC/DC during his presentation, which I would just like to say for the record, I did not do. But Simon is a very skilled presenter. He understands the direction that this technology is going. And I think, as you say, he brought a dose of reality to some of the more sensationalist headlines that we're hearing. But look, we've talked enough about this. Obviously, you and Steve had a lot to say, Mark. So why don't we go to the interview with you and Stephen Loynd from TrendzOwl?
Hey, Steve, it's great to get you here. Now, we were on a panel together looking at the future of CX at Peter's CxO conference in Glasgow last week. And I actually was thinking that at the conference, I would kind of grab people and do a quick, vox pop with yourself and maybe a couple of the panel members. But, at the time, you're at a conference, it's crazy, it's noisy, it's difficult to get people the time and attention. So I just thought we'd have a quick call now as a kind of a debrief, some of your thoughts on it. So, I mean, just maybe just to kick off, just a couple of general views, how did you feel about being in Glasgow?
I love the city, really the history. I mean, I've been to Ireland and the UK a million times. Actually never been to Scotland, Mark. So it was really nice to get there, and just the history, the surroundings. This is where the Scottish Enlightenment took place. And as far as the event went, I told the guys, the organizers, Mark, Tracy, and Peter, that I think it was the best one yet, because you get back together with people in the industry, and they've reached a point now where they've really generated a lot of activity and excitement on the ground at the event. And then the follow-up on social media is really strong. I won't mention the company I worked for a number of years, but I speak at their events 3 times a year, and they were very well run. But I think CxO is the best as far as this industry goes in bringing people together and then continuing the conversation in real time on social media. And this is another small outlet of that, perhaps another example.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And I think that the rule that you have to be part of a BPO to actually subscribe and enter the event, it kind of helps to keep it on this side of the fence as well. I mean, I know there's some other people there, but I think that they're all sponsors.
Yeah, I think that's right. And of course, there's new faces showing up too. It's an evolving industry, and it seems to be expanding. And I'm sure we'll get into the changes that are taking place. So it's a very interesting time. And of course, this is all coming out of pandemic time too. So we're all still getting our sea legs, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, our session was looking at the future of CX, and there were quite a few different topics mentioned. But I think I liked Mike Havard's analogy of the Spitfire and how it dominated World War II and the Battle of Britain. And it went through about 14 or 15 iterations. But then suddenly the jet engine came in, and what was once the elite fighting machine was suddenly worthless. And I think that, he was basically saying this is what could be about to happen to BPO. I mean, how did you read that?
Yeah, that was what a panel. We had great people. And that was one of the more salient points that kind of brought everything back to, hey, we're at a time where everything is racing ahead. And we're actually living through a change in the industry that we've talked about it before. The industry's been criticized for being staid and the call center industry and this and that. Well, this is where the proof points of AI are going to be proven out in this industry. How good is it going to get? And generative AI has now hijacked the conversation everywhere. And I think Mike's point was right. I mean, everybody's got to be ready for the future. Before we hopped on the call, I had run across a McKinsey study about driving the need for next gen technologies and approaches in outsourcing. And they did, this is still fairly recent, a kind of a detailed analysis of business process outsourcing deals. And this was looking at those that closed between 2016 and 2020. And they took a sample from a pool of over 200 transactions, and they showed about 1/4 from that time included at least one digital component. So in other words, things like mobile applications, analytics, social media, automation, cloud, Internet of Things, et cetera, et cetera. But the number of those deals almost doubled over the 5-year period. So you can think that was from a 5-year period from a few years ago, and that's just accelerating. So I think Mike was onto something. BPOs need to be able to offer that transformational, in every positive sense of the word and real sense of the word, capabilities to clients across industries now. And we've been talking about this for a long time, but now it's really happening. And that was part of his point, I think.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of discussion around generative AI potentially replacing a lot of seats in the contact centers, and what that could potentially mean for the business model that most of these organizations are using. But when you sort of sit there in the room and talk to most of them, it seems that most of them believe that the real immediate change will be inside the contact center, dramatically improving coaching, onboarding, quality control. All these kind of areas will begin before we sort of see a rapid change in the actual interaction with customers. So how did you feel about that discussion?
Yeah, one of the great things about you and I, we get together over a few beers, and our obsession with writers like Anthony Burgess is we're always trying to inject a little bit of a sci-fi feel, if you will, to force it into the conversation and do some scenario planning, if you will, on what might happen. I mean, that you're exactly right. That's always sort of been the answer. Well, things are going to become more efficient, but it's full speed ahead. But when you start to wrap in questions about emergent phenomena, if you will, and one of them is AI, generative AI, but other AI applications as well, you begin to wonder what percentage of volumes will be automated? What portion of complexity will be absorbed by artificial intelligence? And we've seen all the Lex Fridman podcasts and whoever is out there talking about. There was a letter recently by top experts looking for a bit of a pause on the technology. And maybe part of it is a concern that, Yuval Noah Harari has been talking about. And I just mentioned McKinsey, and they've been concerned too about, over the years, the potential for talent displacement. Nobody knows if that's the case or not. And then there's the argument that you're sort of getting at, that a lot of answers we get at the conference, that this is just going to fuel and empower human beings to be even better at their job. The big line now is from the CEO, everybody's quoting, of NVIDIA, that AI isn't going to take your job, someone with AI is. And to me, that's like, well, it's kind of the same thing, but I don't have the answers. But that's one of the emergent phenomena that we need to keep an eye on. And it's back to Mike Havard's point as well, perhaps.
Yeah, and I mean, coming back to that as well, because I think that, Mike's analogy was really talking about this industry being, large buildings full of people taking calls. That's kind of how it's always been. And even when we introduced social media, it was almost like, add another 50 agents to handle Twitter and Facebook, so it was just kind of added on. It was extra seats. And yet we're now seeing like potentially a fundamental change to the journey, much greater automation, generative AI able to handle a lot of those social media interactions automatically. So how do we sort of still organize around number of FTEs and people sitting in a contact center taking calls when we should actually be pricing or basing the cost of this on actual customer success?
Yeah, and that's the McKinsey report that I quoted a few minutes ago. That's exactly the point that they're making. And Stephanie Todd made this point on our panel. I mean, she knows a lot from her time years ago, many years ago now, not too many years ago, but she's not old enough for that. But she was heavily involved in the work from home initiatives at Teletech. And as you said, now it's all about hybrid work and how we're adapting. We've seen some of the stats on the real estate in some of the big cities. How are BPOs going to adjust to this? These are the things they need to be thinking about. Again, this term scenario planning. If they're not thinking about a new type of a jet, not only a jet engine, back to Mike's metaphor, but a new type of jet itself. And then what battles do you want to fight and what battles do you want to avoid in today's world? And so all of these things are coming into play. And you spoke eloquently, of course, about aspects of the gig economy on the panel as well. I mean, that's still in play in a big way, despite the politicization, if you will, in some of the media on some of these topics. And we also on the panel talked about, Alistair was particularly good getting into, we're going to have to be more aware about ESG strategy and impact sourcing, because all of this stuff, it involves human beings. And it's not just, somebody has made this point, it's not just impact sourcing in, quote, developing countries. And maybe Alistair made this point, it's in places like the United States and the UK too, where people are feeling stress and are under pressure. So although globalization is being fractured in ways we couldn't have imagined, we're also seeing similarities around the world that we've never seen before with some of the themes that we talk about.
Yeah. And I suppose there's also the kind of reality that we're seeing right now with high inflation, everybody demanding lower costs. I saw Keith O'Looney from ThinScale on LinkedIn earlier today, just saying, all of the BPOs he's talking to are being asked to do more work offshore, reduce their prices, but also increase quality and increase the ramp up time at the same time. So it just seems like, how do they all square the circle?
Yeah, how do you become a BPO that's in a sense geared toward it? It's like, you can talk about different industries, but think about the technology industry specifically. Hyperscalers and startups are seeking differentiation, if you will, via superior forms of operational proficiency and seeking outsourcing partners with that kind of ability that can design and scale sophisticated global support operations and that can do it seamlessly and quickly. And so providers are going to need to influence that whole process end to end. They're going to have to bring to bear their expertise, not only with the human touch of quality subject matter experts or skilled advisors, but digitization, automation, and all about process optimization. And the demands are such that you'll probably see more of the smaller BPOs being absorbed, perhaps, that aren't going to be able to keep up with that type of race. Conversely, they might argue, oh, we're smaller entities, and so we can win the race against these giants. And I know you had a great podcast recently talking about those big acquisitions that have taken place in the space. And certainly that's to be taken into consideration, that there are smaller and medium-sized BPO players that can act quickly and help those types of startups and such. So it really depends on which side of the fence you're on. And it's hard to know through the fog of war, of the fast-moving developments that are going on now, if you will, where you might come down on this argument. It would depend on the situation, the client, the industry, and the provider, I suppose.
Yeah, and maybe that is an area where we might finally start to see a big ramping up of gig CX, because then, you're looking at trying to get costs down, but also trying to get the ramp up moving much faster than, requiring office space and long onboarding periods and this kind of thing. Because if you can transfer in people who are already subject matter experts, then you're going to be up to speed much faster.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think that'll continue to be a big piece of things and an important piece of things. And, I use the technology space example just because we're in a time where, of course, everybody's talking about the Apple Vision Pro release. And, you and I have talked a little bit about the where is the quote metaverse headed? Is it real? Will it be real someday? And there's all sorts of arguments, but and it's fun and it's to talk about that stuff. But you do think about the impacts over time as consumers become even more expectant and demanding, as kind of these virtual experience and augmented experiences manifest. What will that mean for support and service? And it's something that a lot of us are thinking more about.
Yeah, and in fact, I was just talking to someone at one of the big BPOs today who was saying that one of the problems everybody is facing is this idea that there is a continuous loop in the customer journey. Now or previously, you would go shopping. Even if it was e-commerce, you would go to eBay or you would go to Amazon and you would do a bit of shopping. But now it's in everything that you're scrolling through. Every time you're looking through your Instagram, somebody's trying to sell you something and you can just click here and you can buy immediately. And it's just nonstop.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been submerged in this weird world. I answered a comment by Matt Kendall today about the Apple Vision Pro, and he made a comment to the effect of, I think it was on your post or my post, I forget whose, but he said something like, the one thing that sort of disconcerts him is the being able to see the eyes of the individual through the visors. And I laughed when he said that. I thought it's like you're snorkeling, and it's kind of, we're all submerged in this new world where it's a constant loop, like you said, and we're all swimming around looking at each other. And it's just wild what's happening. It really is. I mean, it's fun to talk about and to think about and write about, because it could go in directions that nobody really expects.
Yeah, and stuff like augmented reality has really become embedded in the gaming community. But I guess what we're looking for here now is just, what is it beyond gaming that is going to really make people go out and buy this equipment and kind of get into these environments? I think the virtual office is possibly one important area where we will see this being picked up. But beyond that, it's just hard to see the applications right now.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's one of the really interesting points about it. I mean, I read a quote the other day. It was great about how, and that the prognostication was seemed so excessive. That's not the right word, but he was saying something like, oh, by the mid 2020s, maybe 2030, but I forget exactly the year, the thought of looking down at your phone as you walk down the street will seem, absurd, and people will laugh at that image. And while I'm not suggesting that something new will come that quickly, I also kind of like, I'm sure you've had the same thought when you see these headsets, whether it's from Meta or the new one from Apple, they're still pretty, cumbersome. And you kind of laugh and think, well, if technology does continue to race ahead, maybe someday it'll be an elegant pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses and, we all look like Paul Newman And that's a whole, and then but to your point, what are the applications still there? And I don't quite know the answer. But right now we're still snorkeling around looking for something outside of gaming and maybe enterprise communications, like you said. But who knows what the future holds?
Okay, perfect. So any other thoughts? I mean, anything else that you picked up from the panel?
Just really had a lot of fun. The other thing that I brought up was the whole, and I didn't mean to bum people out with the possibilities of, what would we do if another pandemic hit sooner than we expect? There's an avian flu now. You don't see a lot of reporting on it, but it's very serious and it's affecting the wild bird population. What happens if it jumps to human beings? But I suppose it's not overly healthy to obsess on these things too much. I suppose we have the operational structures and the infrastructure now to work from home. I think what I was trying to allude to was, what about mental health and some of those questions for all of us, and particularly for young people and kids. I think about that a lot, and that's not unrelated to the other topic about, if there ever is a metaverse fully formed, what might that mean for mental health? I wrote a blog on this, and I referenced Flann O'Brien, who was pretty out there as a writer, as you know. And it may have stretched the point a little bit, but I think he was concerned with the same things back in the 1940s in the wake of the atomic age. Where is this civilization going? And we all sort of need to stick together and make sure we remain sane as technology kind of races ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that resilience for the BPOs is definitely an important message, that we all focused on it immediately after the pandemic, but certainly it seems to be switching back to the traditional cost focus. So maybe there needs to be a bit more balance there.
Yeah, well said.
Okay, excellent. Well, there's a great summary, and hopefully see you again at the next one.
Cheers, Mark, and thanks for having me on. I'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.